Welcome to I May Be Wrong.
I don't know what this world is coming to,
but I don't think so. We're broadcasting from the greater Nashville area, the home of country music, beyond the borders of political correctness and identity politics. Facts and faith are our demarcations. Truth lights our path.
Here's the Barry White of Podcast Radio,
the venerable Alfonso Ashworth.
Well, welcome to another exciting episode of I May Be Wrong, but I don't think so. Of course, if you're listening in or you're viewing in today, you can't see me today on the show. I am broadcasting video today, but you can later catch up with us on the show with a podcast. So don't forget about that at I May Be Wrong, but I don't think so.com. We got a great program lined up for you today. It's very controversial in a lot of sense because I have been getting a lot of resistance from Facebook, on this topic. They are refusing to allow me to pay for advertising. That's something very disturbing. They are ignoring the fact that I have a right to get my opinion out there. But trust me, folks, shadow banning and content control is very real. So remember that. We need your support. We need you to get out there and let people know about this program. Of course, we got a great guest on today. Catherine Davis is going to be our guest. We're going to bring her on. But before we do, there's some clips, a series of clips that I want to play with Margaret Sanger in her voice. And then also we're going to play a clip from Hillary Clinton. The audio is not that great, but you'll get what's being said. And then Bernie Sanders. And then, of course, we're going to be talking about abortion. We're going to be talking about Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement. But first, I'm going to play a clip from Margaret Sanger. Listen in.
Parenthood Federation maintains that European women should stop having babies for the next 10 years.
Don't you think such a theory, such a radical theory, is antisocial?
On the contrary, it seems to me that it is more practical and humane.
What about the women who want babies now and in 10 years will not be able to have babies? Rather impractical, don't you think?
Oh, John, you do ask hard questions. I should think that instead of being impractical, it is really very practical and intelligent and humane.
This country, having babies is the only thing left which is both unrationed and untaxed. Do you think we really ought to stop?
Well, I suppose a subject like that is really so personal that it's entirely up to the parents to decide. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies.
Well, you heard it, no more babies. Now, let's see what Margaret Sanger had to say about the greatest sin.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin.
Now, you see, this is what we're up against. Now, Facebook and these social media sites do not want this message to get out there. But listen to what Hillary Clinton said when she was being awarded the Margaret Sanger Award.
I have to tell you that it was a great privilege when I was told that I would receive this award. I admire Margaret Sanger enormously. Her courage, her tenacity, her vision.
Well, you heard what Margaret Sanger said. And then, of course, now we're dealing with this with Bernie Sanders and, of course, this climate control movement that's out there. But listen to Bernie Sanders when he talks about abortion and population control.
Human population growth has more than doubled in the past 50 years. The planet cannot sustain this growth. I realize this is a poisonous topic for politicians, but it's crucial to face. Empowering women and educating everyone on the need to curb population growth seems a reasonable campaign to enact. Would you be courageous enough to discuss this issue and make it a key feature of a plan to address climate catastrophe?
Well, Martha, the answer is yes. And The answer has everything to do with the fact that women in the United States of America, by the way, have a right to control their own bodies and make reproductive decisions. And the Mexico City Agreement, which denies American aid to those organizations around the world that allow women to have abortions or even get involved in birth control, to me is totally absurd. So I think, especially in poor countries around the world, where women do not necessarily want to have large numbers of babies, and where they can have the opportunity through birth control to control the number of kids they have, something I very, very strongly support.
See, okay, let's get into this. Catherine Davis is the founder and president of the Restoration Project. She often partners with the National Black Pro-Life Coalition, the Network of Politically Active Christians, and the Frederick Douglas Foundation in an ongoing effort to educate Americans about the issues that are impacting the black community. Catherine's a public speaker, a civil rights champion, is a magna cum laude graduate of Tufts University, who attended the University of Bridgeport School of Law. Of course, early in 2010, she partnered with the Radiance Foundation to launch one of the most news-gathering pro-life campaigns ever, the Endangered Species Billboard Web campaign. Catherine was featured in numerous TV, radio, newspaper features, including the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, ABC, World News, NPR, and throughout the entire blogosphere. She believes in holding public officials accountable and legislatively chipping away at the practice and policies that are ravaging the free America. Welcome to the show, Catherine Davis.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited because I've heard you many times when I was with Lonnie Poindexter on his show, Lion Chasers Radio, and it was Lonnie who recommended that I have you on the show, and I was so excited that you were able to come. Let's dig into this. Let my audience know who you are, what you're about, and why it's so important of what you're doing.
Well, I am the founder and president of the Restoration Project, which is a pro-life, pro-family, pro-education organization that right now is focused on life, because if we don't have life, there's no family that needs an education. So that's where my heart and my passion is right now, to end abortion on demand in America. And in doing that work over the years, I have found that the black community has been targeted by the abortion industry, specifically targeted by Planned Parenthood. And most of us don't know that. We don't know that they have been placing their abortion facilities within a 2-mile walking radius of a black or Latino neighborhood. And so we have basically drank the Kool-Aid, believing that they are pro-woman and pro-civil rights, especially because they use the civil rights language to attract us into their facilities. Words like access to reproductive health care and reproductive justice and the right to self-determine what we will do with our bodies. Those are the kinds of things that Martin Luther King and Andrew Young and John Lewis and Ralph Abernathy and them were asking for back in the mid-50s to 60s.
Yes.
So we work to point out Planned Parenthood's deception in the hopes of bringing down that institution that has discriminated against the black community for so long.
Well, and you know, of course, I led in the show with Margaret Sanger and her voice, and I know you've heard some of these audio clips and read the articles, and there's a lot of information out there about Margaret Sanger. How does this relate to what you're talking about and what you do to try to, tear down those myths? What did Margaret Sanger, what was she able to do?
She had a project that she launched in 1939 called the Negro Project.
Correct.
And that project, she partnered with a man named Gamble of the Procter & Gamble fortune to do this project to get black ministers and physicians to go into the black community to, at that time, teach and preach birth control. One of the best kept open secrets in the country is that once she launched that project, it never ended. Planned Parenthood says, she was a product of her time, and her history is complicated. Well, there really wasn't anything complicated about her history. She was a eugenicist, someone who believed that only certain people should be allowed to have children. And she specifically told the nation and the world who she felt like the group of people were that shouldn't be allowed to have children, and it was the Negroes.
Well, of course,
Planned Parenthood, I'm sorry?
Go ahead, finish.
So Planned Parenthood has never renounced the Negro Project. They have never gone on record saying that that project didn't exist or that its tenets have been ended today. They simply do, what many people do today and tell the lie and tell it often so that we will believe it and buy into the ideology that abortion, once it was legalized in 1973, that it was a friend of women, especially, quote, women of color.
Correct. So they were sterilization programs. We know what happened in Tuskegee. We know what happened in parts of the South where black men were tested on with syphilis and other diseases, and black women were convinced that they were having medical procedures, but actually they were being sterilized so that they couldn't have children. And that went on for many more years because we've had lawsuits here recently in the past few years where those cases were actually brought into court. But Margaret Sanger, she was a racist. She was very well funded. She was definitely targeting minorities. But how did Hillary Clinton, of course, we know her husband, what he did when he was in office. He imprisoned and jailed many, many, many black youth under his programs. What is Hillary Clinton, how does she tie into this with her being awarded this recognition or this honor under Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger? Why hasn't the media, better yet, why hasn't the black community learned from this?
Well, you said a lot in that question. We have to back up for a second and look at what was going on in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, actually from 1907 forward, because 1907 is when they allowed the first eugenics board in the nation. And the eugenics boards were boards that, like you said, approved the involuntary sterilization of, in the United States, it was more than 63,000 people that they sterilized, like Elaine Riddick, who was raped when she was 13 years old. And when she had her baby, the state of North Carolina made her grandmother put her X on the paper because her grandmother was illiterate, saying that they could sterilize Elaine because Elaine had never worked a day in her life and she was feeble-minded. Well, Elaine was 13. She was raped by her neighbor who threatened her life if she told anyone, and yet they sterilized her when she had her son at age 14. This is the kind of thing that was going on. This was the climate in the United States. And you are exactly right. people were being experimented on, but I want to dispel the notion that it was quote-unquote minorities.
Okay.
The name of the project was the Negro Project.
Exactly.
So they were specifically targeting people, melanin-rich people like you and me. They were not targeting Asians or other ethnicities. It was, at the onset, black women and children, and then and men, because you talked about the Tuskegee study, and then later on they started targeting the Latino community. So you see like the Puerto Rican cancer study where this doctor injected cancer into Puerto Ricans so that he could see what the outcome would be. And he was very specific in describing Puerto Ricans as nasty, despicable people who didn't deserve to live. This is the environment that Planned Parenthood grew up out of. They sprung up with this Nazi mentality. And if you go back to the Nuremberg trials, you can see very clearly that Hitler and the people surrounding Hitler said that when they were doing the eugenics program in Nazi Germany, they learned it from the United States.
Correct.
And we have the documentation of that. So let's fast forward now to Hillary Clinton getting the Maggie Award.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you go back and you look at Hillary's background and what her allegiances were, you see that, like Margaret Sanger, she was very much aligned with the KKK, with other groups that historically and systemically discriminated against black men and women. There are pictures of Hillary kissing Robert Byrd, who was at the head of the KKK at one point, and she's embracing him and his doctrines. She embraced Margaret Sanger and her doctrines openly, and those doctrines were to limit the black birth rate in America. And eventually around the world.
And around the world, because we know that even now in other countries, in poor countries, this practice is still being used. And today, the eugenics movement, of course, you mentioned Adolf Hitler. He was a great admirer of people like Darwin, Darwinism, and those sort of things, a superior race of people through genetics. So that right there points to where we are today with this population control, that we have too many people, and there's too many poor people, and there's too many homeless people. There's too many people, period. And so now, today, with this population, this climate control, all these things that we're hearing about, these are the same things that they were talking about during Margaret Sanger's time, that we wouldn't have enough food. Right. We didn't have enough resources. So how do you feel like today's movement is being the same atmosphere, especially with climate change? How do you feel with that in mind with Margaret Sanger?
Well, if you look at their policies, it's always this elite group of people who feel like they should be able to dictate what happens to all of the rest of us. That's what Darwin's theory of evolution was. You know, he wanted to, quote, preserve the favored races. Right. That was the name of his book. And Margaret Sanger and others like her latched onto that very early on in the United States. Way before there was an Adolf Hitler, there was a Margaret Sanger who was promoting and espousing these policies. So you fast forward to today, and you hear people like Bernie Sanders saying things like controlling the population through abortion. Well, where did that come from? That came from the very climate that was in the United States under Richard Nixon, Margaret Sanger, Alan Guttmacher, Frederick Osborne, and all of these other eugenicists back in the late 60s and early 70s who felt like we needed to control the population. In fact, Richard Nixon set up the Office of Population Affairs, which many people in the United States probably don't even realize that it exists. But if we said Title 10, they would recognize, oh, okay, well, the Office of Population Affairs is the office that administers Title 10. Now, you're hearing all this talk today about, President Trump putting out a new rule that if you do abortions, you can't get Title 10 money. Well, my response to that is that's always been the law. That is written into the law itself. If you are an organization that uses abortion as a method of family planning, you are not eligible to get Title 10, and yet Planned Parenthood, almost from the beginning of abortion in 1973, got Title 10 money. How could that be? Especially when that provision of the law was put into the law to assuage people like Dick Gregory and Fannie Lou Hamer and some members of the NAACP who were pushing back against that formation, the formation of Title 10. And so they put that in the law to assuage their fears, and yet Planned Parenthood has gotten hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars and been exterminating literally the black race ever since, because since abortion was legalized in 1973, 20 million black people have been aborted. And that's more than the entire United States black population in 1960.
And I don't know why we cannot get that message to resonate. And it's not about the Democrats or Republicans. By and large, the Democrats, though, have been a part of this from day one, going back to slavery, and we don't have time for that. But if you look at what's going on today politically, there's a lot of money being spread around by other countries that are coming here and being used against the black community. But the black community seems to be unaware or really unwilling to look into this. How do we get that message through your foundations and through your organizations? One, how can people help you do that and for you to carry that message out there?
Well, I do education forums all around the country for women of influence, pastors' wives, ministry leaders, etc., to get this message out. And I think it is up to us, because we have to educate. Now, as we educate, we are beginning to see the change come. In fact, the Church of God in Christ is the first denomination that has openly established a program to push that against abortion in the black community, called the Family Life Campaign. So it comes through education, and of course, education takes money. So your listeners can always make a donation to the Restoration Project at the restorationproject.life. Or they can mail a contribution to the Restoration Project at P.O. Box 1780, Stone Mountain, Georgia 30086. But we must get this message out, because they are succeeding in eradicating the black population out of America today, because we are no longer having enough children to reproduce ourselves. And what do I mean by that? I mean, in order for the black community to stay 12% of the population, every woman of childbearing age would have to have 2.1 children. Today we are at 1.8. And in some places like New York City, more black babies are aborted than are born alive. So we now have a genocide in the United States that we can directly tie to Planned Parenthood's targeting, as evidenced by Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's statement in 2009 that she thought Roe was the case that was going to help us get rid of the populations we don't want too many of. And that is exactly what's been happening in these United States to the black community.
And
we're
it's hard.
The population. Yeah.
It's hard to put your mind around that this has been going on for so long. And as you just stated, and we've talked about many times, that number, that critical birth rate number, is underwater. And we're stagnant and we're declining. And in many cases, it's happening right before our very eyes. You got about a minute, Catherine. Like I said, tell my audience, one, how can they reach out to you personally? You're a public speaker. Can they go to your website, or do you have a contact information?
They can reach me at Catherine at therestorationproject.life. That's Catherine with a C, Catherine, at therestorationproject.life. Or they can simply call me at 678-381-1058.
Well, I thank you. I really appreciate you. You're very knowledgeable of this subject, and I'm so glad that you were able to come on the show today. And I really want to thank you for being a part of the program. God bless you.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Of course, you were listening to Catherine Davis with the foundation, with the Restoration Project. And we really appreciate her coming on. You've heard this before. You've heard it over and over again. I don't know how many times this has to be put before you. And if you've heard this, it's incumbent upon you to do something about it. One way you can do something is to help people like Catherine. Another way you can do is to help people like me stay on air. So we need your support. And I really appreciate those who have been giving generously to the program. We need more support, and you can do so at ImayBeWrong.com. Go to our website, and you can help us there. Get the message out there. Facebook is not going to help. Twitter is not going to help. All the social media, Instagram, all these social media sites, they're made to sell advertising. And when they will not allow people like me to advertise for paid advertising, the message is loud and clear. You're not wanted. Your message is not what we want out there in your community. And I have been turned down more than once when I tried to advertise this type of program. My dollars and your dollars should spend the same as everyone else's dollars. The LGBT community. This new person that they have out here, this Greta, this young girl that's now out here being made the champion of the young people around the world to save the planet. They're allowing these people to advertise. So we need your support. We need your help. And we need to stay on this constant. We cannot let up just because we have a president that we like. Another person is going to be president at some point. And chances are it's not going to be someone like a President Trump who is pro-life, who is trying to defund Planned Parenthood, who is putting people back to work, including minorities and women. The next president may be more like Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, that's the way this country is headed. And so you and I have a responsibility to fight this on every level possible, including programs like this, and including helping people like Catherine Davis and others who are out here doing what they do. Of course, I want to thank the listeners, and I want to thank Catherine for being on the show today. And I really want to thank everyone that participates on the program and helps out with the program. But I want to tell you, God bless you, God bless America, and God bless our children. Peace.
You've been listening to Alfonso Ashworth, the Barry White of Podcast Radio. Go forth and share his message. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. Remember, no two people can ever occupy the same place at the same time. You were uniquely and wonderfully made, born an original. Don't die a copy. God bless. Peace.